So you've been really busy helping improve the lives of Angelenos.
I'm a lifelong Angeleno. I was born here. I grew up here. I've been married now 31 years. I raised my 3 kids who are now in their 20s here in Los Angeles.
We have a huge county, and
Huge.
we have a very diverse communities within our county. And so we need somebody who can represent that, enforce the laws so that people can enjoy the quality of life that California used to always be known for, which, has sadly over the last few years declined.
Gascon's social experiment that he's been running for the last 3.5 years that have favored criminals over victims has failed them. And they feel less safe today than they did when he came into office. They're ready for change, and they believe that I can get the job done.
I'm your host for today, Jessie McGrath. And if you like what you hear on this podcast and would like to see more, click the like button and subscribe. This is my very first podcast as a host. As you know, I've appeared on this show a few times before, and Shelby has consistently asked me if I would be willing to do something, and I finally said yes. And so I'm super excited to be here with you today.
This is the Transparency Podcast Show.
To start off on my inaugural podcast, I have what I think is probably one of the most important guests in the city of and county of Los Angeles today, and that is Nathan Hochman, who is running for the office of district attorney. You are looking to become my boss.
That is the idea. It's a race. I got through the primary on March 5th. There were 12 people running. Gascon, obviously the current DA, along with 11 challengers. I made it through. So it's now just Gascon and myself for the November 5th election.
And interestingly enough about that primary, Gascon, as the incumbent, was only able to get 25% of the vote, which means 75% of the people at the polls think he's wrong for Los Angeles.
That's exactly right. Gascon actually got a historic low. There isn't a DA who's ever sought re-election that got so few votes. In fact, no DA who's ever gotten under 37% of the vote has ever won the general election. And so that's my job. My job is to unify the 75% of the people that rejected him, and they truly cut across all lines, all political lines, Democrats, independents, Republicans, demographic lines, Black, white, Latino, Asian, every religious group, every group out there in society, and geographic lines, from Long Beach and San Pedro to Los Angeles to Lancaster, from Santa Monica to all the valleys, San Gabriel, Santa Clarita, and San Fernando.
Yeah, we have a huge county, and
Huge.
we have a very diverse communities within our county. And so we need somebody who can represent that and enforce the laws so that people can enjoy the quality of life that California used to always be known for, which, has sadly over the last few years declined a little bit.
You're absolutely right. And what's interesting, I put, at this point, thousands of miles on my car in the last couple of months, talking to everyone from small store owners in East LA to I've been in Black churches, I've been in Koreatown, I've met with Chinese American groups, Armenian American groups. I've been up, to neighborhood councils in the Santa Clarita, Antelope Valley. These folks don't agree on a lot, I must tell you, but they do agree on this. The Gascon's social experiment that he's been running for the last 3.5 years that have favored criminals over victims has failed them. And they feel less safe today than they did when he came into office. They're ready for change, and they believe that I can get the job done.
I can tell you from my personal experience, because I have been a prosecutor with the LA County DA's office for over 36 years. I've worked for 5 separate district attorneys, starting with way back in the beginning with Ira Reiner was my boss when I started. And they're both Republicans and Democrats, and I've seen the ebb and flow of things over the course of that 36 years. I've had some really good administrations, some not so good administrations, but I don't believe I've ever seen anything quite like what we've witnessed over the last 4 years with the mismanagement and the gross dereliction of responsibilities that the district attorney has in order to represent the people.
I mean, Gascon, you would think, having never personally prosecuted or defended a single criminal case in his life, even though he's been the DA of San Francisco, destroyed that city, and he's well on to destroying the county of Los Angeles.
And I can say something about that because I was a prosecutor on the Uber case.
Oh, is that right?
Which we prosecuted up in the San Francisco courts and co-counsel with the San Francisco DA's office, and it was while George Gascon was DA up there. Wow. And I can tell you, I saw what was happening to that city almost in real time because I would fly up to Oakland, catch the BART down to the Civic Center, and then walk down to the DA's office or over to the courts. And I saw it almost deteriorating in real time. We went from it being a fairly, nice city. There were always problems because it's San Francisco and you have home. But to having people defecating on the streets, having people shooting up right in front of us, and seeing the stores starting to close. I would always stop in like a CVS and grab a Mountain Dew, and then eventually it closed down and it's no longer there. So I've seen what he did to San Francisco in real time, and I've now seen that same thing kind of happening here in Los Angeles. And so, with full disclosure, I am not an independent on this race. I have endorsed you, and I've shot a video for you because I believe that we do need that change. You have a real incredible history as far as being a prosecutor. You've never been a local prosecutor, but I know you're certainly friends with a lot of my colleagues in my office since you are originally from here. Tell us about your background. Where did you get your education?
Sure. So I'm a lifelong Angeleno. I was born here. I grew up here. I've been married now 31 years. I raised my 3 kids who are now in their 20s here in Los Angeles. Then had the chance to go to Brown University, Stanford Law School, came back to LA, clerked for a federal judge, went right to the U.S. Attorney's Office. I know it wasn't the DA's office. It was the U.S. Attorney's Office. And I was a federal prosecutor for 7 years. Prosecuted everything from narcotics traffickers and gang members to international money launderers. I went after environmental criminals as the head of that section, air, sea, and land polluters. We went after them all. Had the chance also to go after public corruption cases, whether it was corrupt public officials or corrupt cops.
And you actually tried those cases to a jury.
Yes. I unlike Gascon, who's never actually been in a courtroom trying a case. I had 33 trials as a prosecutor. I've had additional trials during the 24 years I've been on the defense side. And so I know what it's like inside of a courtroom. I know how to build cases. I on the prosecution side, I know how to tear them down on the defense side. But
that makes you a little unusual for people that are running for district attorney. I mean, the last 2 district attorneys prior to Gascon being elected were both career prosecutors. They had started with the office. They had worked their way up, Steve Cooley and Jackie Lacey.
Sure.
Whereas Gascon had spent most of his life as a police officer, and then his first foray into being a lawyer was as the district attorney up in San Francisco and then down here. But he never went into the courtroom. He never had to build a case like you and I have had to do.
Correct. I mean, imagine if someone wanted to head up a group of very talented surgeons, but had never done surgery. That's effectively George Gascon heading up a group of very talented trial attorneys, having never been a trial attorney himself. He has no clue what it takes to actually build those type of cases.
And that's hard to do, isn't it?
I mean, it's very hard to do. And again, my prosecutorial background wasn't just in the U.S. Attorney's Office. I got a presidential nomination, a unanimous U.S. Senate confirmation to run the U.S. Department of Justice's tax division back in D.C.
Oh, wow. My daughter was a tax lawyer for the IRS after she graduated school. So she was big into that tax law, something I could never really enjoy. But if you do, that has to be an incredible experience actually running a whole section for the Department of Justice.
It was my wife used to joke around that when I went back to D.C. and she was in charge of the 3 little kids out here, that it was like a guy in his 40s going to fantasy job camp. I mean, it was a great job. I had $100 million budget, 350 very talented lawyers doing cases all over the United States. You know, my dad was actually a tax attorney for 50 years after he was a federal prosecutor. He loved the tax law. I sort of liked it. Struggled in law school to pass my tax classes. But unfortunately, he passed away before I got that position back in D.C. But I'm absolutely convinced he helped me get that position through the karma of this world. And it was a fabulous position. And then after that, I had the chance to go on the defense side. Come back to LA, work for two major international law firms, government investigations practices, and head them up. And along the way, I was also the president of the LA City Ethics Commission and the co-founder of the LA Sheriff's Foundation.
So you've been really busy helping improve the lives of Angelenos.
This episode is brought to you by Kitcaster. Kitcaster books you on top podcasts. How do funded startup founders attract prospects and talent? Podcast interviews. How do entrepreneurs with exits find new deals? Podcast interviews. How do C-suite execs differentiate in crowded markets? Podcast interviews. Kitcaster books you on top podcasts. Click the link in the show notes for a special offer. Celebrate good conversation.
I certainly have tried. When I was the president of the LA City Ethics Commission, it's really holding city officials accountable for their actions. And, we audited, we investigated, and hopefully, at least, for the 5 years I was on that commission, we really made a strong point, whether it's to the politicians themselves, to their staff, to lobbyists, that if you want to be part of the system, you got to do it ethically. You got to do it and follow the rules.
I've seen you speak a few times now, and it's one of the things that I've heard you repeatedly say is that the only way to practice law is ethically, and
right.
To have that highest ethics and to do justice and not just get a victory.
Right. That's the unique responsibility of a prosecutor in our system. Is that they say, and I've always believed that the prosecution wins when justice is done. That doesn't necessarily mean you get a conviction, because it very well might be that as you go through the process, you don't have proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Doesn't necessarily mean someone is innocent, but it does mean in our system they're not guilty. And occasionally prosecutor has to respect that.
And occasionally we end up with cases where we think there's one thing, and then further delving into the facts, you find that our perception was wrong.
Right.
I've had those cases. I've had one where a woman was charged with a robbery, and ultimately, after doing further investigation, I was able to determine that it wasn't her; it was her niece. She had originally told the police that it was her niece. The police didn't believe her. When I did some further investigation, it was clear that was the case, and I ended up dismissing those robberies because. Could I have gone forward on that and tried to get a conviction to prove the robbery? I could have. I would not have felt good about myself. And that's the one thing I see about most of the prosecutors that I work with. We have an incredible commitment to justice and to seeing that the right thing is done.
And that's in large part why it would be such an honor to head up this DA's office. We were talking about before about Gascon's lack of experience. He doesn't trust you folks. He does not trust the 750 deputy district attorneys because he has no desire to learn from you and listen to what you have to say.
As a DA who was sitting there on December 7th when he was sworn in 4 years ago, and seeing him talk about what he was doing, and then suddenly my computer going ding, 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 13 times with emails about how everything was going to change. And then later there was a Zoom call with the managers in the office and we were talking. It was like, why didn't we have this meeting before I got those 13 emails changing all of our policies? You never met with us to discuss with us how to get that, because some of those policies were actually really had beneficial things associated with them, but it got lost in all of the noise because he never once sat down and said, we're in this together. Right. Let's figure out how to make this work. And certainly from what I've heard you speaking, that is your attitude.
Absolutely. I mean, again, Gascon's the extreme. He comes in with literally zero trial experience, and he's telling 750 people with collectively thousands of years of prosecutorial experience how to do their job. And he's enacting the most pro-criminal anti-victim policies. I mean, these are the policies that say everything from, if you're under 18, you can steal just under $950 because it's a misdemeanor and we're not going to prosecute you. It's policies that originally said if you use a gun in connection with a violent crime, we're not going to charge the gun enhancement. If you're part of a gang when you commit a violent crime, we're not going to charge the gang enhancement. If you're the worst of the worst and you're a 3 strikes offender, we're not charging the 3 strikes cases. Again, if you want to go ahead and enact a social experiment, consult with the very people who are going to implement that for you. He did none of that. He literally imposed these special directives that you were described from up high. Then he watched them not work. And then he has the arrogance to not pivot and not go back to find out, okay, guys, what's not working? How can we fix this? Let's all work together to get this thing fixed. He has doubled and tripled down on his political ideology, his political agenda, when a DA should only be relying on 2 things, the facts and the law to make decisions.
That's what our bread and butter is. What are the facts that we determine them to be through our investigation and working with our partners in law enforcement, getting to those facts and then looking at it and saying, okay, this is what the law is. And sometimes the law is very specific on what it is that you're supposed to do. I mean, we have a lawsuit, the Association of Deputy District Attorneys has a lawsuit pending that is now in front of the Supreme Court on the issue of being directed not to file 3 strikes cases when the statute actually says that we have to. Now, whether we enforce and do the full enforcement of the 3 strikes, that's where discretion comes in. But I don't think there's any discretion in being and charging it, because that lets the court know the seriousness of the person that the charges are against.
The 3 strikes policy is a very good example of how George Gascon operates. So he comes in the office, as you were saying, first day, first hour, first email, or first 13 emails, and he eliminates that policy. And again, the 3 strikes policy, for people who don't know what it is, they're going after the worst of the worst offenders. It means you either committed a violent and serious offense, got convicted, got sentenced, went to jail. That didn't stop you. You did another one. Another violent and serious offense, got convicted, got sentenced, went to jail. That didn't stop you. Now you've committed the 3rd one. And that's where the penalties keep ratcheting up. So Gascon says, I refuse to allow you folks to implement that law, even though that law, when it passed in 1994 and it passed by 70% of the people, says you shall file those type of charges. So your association actually hired myself and my law firm to go into, I was part of it.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that.
That was me. We went into court and we did something that had never been done before. We asked a judge to go ahead and preliminarily enjoin a DA's policy because the DA's employees, those deputy district attorneys, said it was illegal. And sure enough, the judge agreed. The judge said, Gascon is trying to implement it in an illegal policy, and I'm going to stop him from doing it. And he kept going. He went to the California Court of Appeals, and he said, we need to now overturn the judge's ruling. And the California Court of Appeals basically slapped his argument in the face and said, George Gascon, you are not a sovereign with unreviewable discretion. You, like others, have to follow the law. And kept his preliminary injunction to show you his arrogance. He's now, as you said, taking this to the California Supreme Court. Now, by the way, defense attorneys for 30 years have been trying to overturn the 3 strikes law. That's their job. They represent the worst of the worst offenders, and they would just assume have this law thrown off the books by the courts. They have failed. Now we have a prosecutor that is trying to throw out the 3 strikes law. This is it's not almost, it's unheard of. And hopefully the California Supreme Court will have the opportunity to once again slap Gascon and say you cannot violate the law to enforce it.
Well, if they don't get to that by the time December rolls around, I'm sure that's one of the things that you are going to reverse from these policies that George has done.
That is way up on my list. That actually, if I get the chance to be the DA on that day or soon thereafter, we will send a message to the California Supreme Court that we would just assume them not to consider this case and allow the lower court decision basically throwing out Gascon's policy to remain.
And it's interesting. If you do get sworn in, will I get 13 emails within the first minute of your saying I do?
The first email will be thanking you for all your great support and your great advice. You know, you've been running the asset forfeiture section, the DA's office. It's not only an incredibly important section, I believe it's an underutilized section. I think that if you go ahead, interestingly, and take people's money and their property when they commit crimes, it sends a very strong message. In fact, sometimes even a stronger message to some people than necessarily putting them through the criminal justice system or putting them even in jail. There are many opportunities out there to maximize the use of your section in connection with, again, all the other agencies that are out there trying to bring justice. And I'd be a pleasure and a real great experience to work with you to figure out where the opportunities lie.
And it's interesting because if you look at some of the statutes, there was one that I had no idea about, but we've had an epidemic of street takeovers, and Los Angeles County actually has its own ordinance that allows for the forfeiture of the vehicles of individuals involved in those types of activities, although we've never really figured out a way to utilize it. I don't think there's anything set up within the court yet, and we'd have to set up the whole system. But I actually got a call from somebody in my office, one of the DAs, who was concerned about this and knew about that statute and wanted to know how to do it. So it's definitely an area, and especially my section, that could expand. But I've been contracting when I took over on March 31st, 2020, which was right smack dab in the middle of the pandemic, and it was me coming in and having no one there, and so I had to figure out how to work this section. But when I took over, I was supervising 4 lawyers. I am now supervising 2. Because we have had attrition within our office. We've had a lot of people resign. We've had a lot of people move over to other prosecuting agencies because they just did not want to work in the environment that we had. I was lucky to be somewhat insulated from a lot of these policies because I don't handle any of those criminal cases, so I wasn't having to do all of that. But I saw it. I saw it all around me. I saw people like John McKinney, who is an excellent trial lawyer who was in our major trials section, whose office was literally just down the hall from mine. I would see him every day, get retaliated against and get transferred. And allegedly it was a promotion because he was moving into a DIC position. But I think if you ask most people in our office if they could be a DIC or one of the trial lawyers in the major crimes section, most of us would want to be in major crimes. And so I've seen that, and I've seen the effect that it has on the morale of people. And you were talking about when you were running, you had a lot of opponents. I knew a lot of your opponents. There were a lot of people from my office who got involved in that race. Jonathan Hatami. Literally almost the entire field was DAs or former DAs.
No, it's very true. And again, when I have had the chance not just to get the endorsement from the union representing all the deputy district attorneys, but to try and meet with as many of them as possible. I'm over 300 at this point through meetings throughout this county. And you folks are, you get my applause and my appreciation because you're on the front lines of a battle. And the battle isn't against the criminals, shockingly. It's against your own boss in the front office that have done their absolute best to put the handcuffs on you folks to make it much more difficult for you to do your job than they have to actually get you the resources, training, and everything else to do your job better. My philosophy is very simple. It's a philosophy that every business leader analyzes the business. And in this business's case, you're the DA's office, what's the greatest asset? Is it the cases, the courtrooms, the computers? Is it the toner? Of course not. It's the 750 deputy district attorneys. It's the 200 plus investigators in the Bureau of Investigation. It's the hundreds of support staff that are part of the DA's office. That's your greatest resource. So my job as DA is to maximize that resource. Gascon just doesn't get that. He literally, I don't know if he's scared of you folks, intimidated because he's never been in a courtroom himself, but he actually has put in deputy public defenders to help run the office. I mean, these are people who've never been prosecutors. They've been representing the criminals their whole career. And now they're switching sides without any experience. And he is forsaking all the decades of experience that he could be using to the office's advantage. So it's not a shock that over 200 people have left the DA's office and haven't been able to have been replaced. Your numbers are down hundreds.
And believe me, I've experienced that because I've had people pulled from my unit to go temporarily to handle something in juvenile or another court because they did not have enough prosecutors to cover the basic courts that we have. I'm what they consider a specialized unit because we're not doing that, and we have a few of those, and they do very important things. We have a consumer protection division, we have an environmental crimes division, and we have a lot of specialty like code enforcement, things like that. But these are things that are very highly specialized and technical, and you can't just throw people in there, but they're pulling people out of those and not letting them be able to do their jobs because they're not able to adequately staff the basic core courts that are our responsibility.
Yeah, and one additional statistic that is not lost on me is that they estimate there's over 10,000 unfiled cases there. I mean, in the past, if you had a couple hundred unfiled cases, it was cause for concern. Now that number is over 10,000 unfiled cases. And what that translates to is think about how many victims have now suffered where the police then investigated the case, handed it over to the DA's office to make a decision, and literally the DA's office is sitting on over 10,000 cases, sitting on it.
And I see that directly in my job at asset forfeiture because our section is basically broken down into two sections, under $40,000 or over $40,000. If it's under $40,000, we have to have a criminal filing of a predicate offense. So it has to be a narcotics trafficking type of case before we can do a forfeiture. And we have to file that in the criminal court where that case is pending. I have been forced to reject multiple thousands of dollars of cases, some, $35,000. I've had to reject those because there was not a filing within the 1-year statute of limitations that I have to bring the forfeiture action. So we're leaving money on the table.
Right. And this is, when you say money, we're talking illegal proceeds. I mean, this isn't just money. This is money that was part of a crime.
This is the illegal proceeds of narcotics trafficking. These are individuals, and we're not one of those agencies like we have in some parts of the country where you're taking things from mom and pop and just because they're driving through. All of ours are we have to have the proof of the narcotics trafficking, and we're very strict in relationship to that. So we're not being able to punish some of these narcotics dealers by taking their proceeds. So not only, they don't get filed on, they get their $35,000 back.
And you know who's paying attention to this? The criminals. The criminals, I represent, again, I've been a defense lawyer. They call it the Gascon deal. That's like if someone gets arrested and you give them a deal, like, well, you're going to have to go to jail for a few years. You committed a pretty serious crime. They said, no. I want the Gascon deal. They literally call it that. That's the deal. That's the get out of jail free card deal. It's funny. They in Seal Beach, interestingly, the Seal Beach Police Department started an Instagram campaign. and it says, "Don't steal in Seal." And what it is body camera footage of them arresting people stealing in Seal Beach. And the people who are stealing there say, "Okay, cite and release me, let me go." And they're going, "You're in Orange County." These people thought that Seal Beach was still in LA County.
Oh, wow.
And they go, "You're in Orange County. We're taking you to jail right now." And they're going, "Wait, I'm not in LA? Well, in LA, I can just give me a ticket, a speeding ticket." No. Because you're in Orange County, they said, "Well, here's the stuff back. Whatever I can do, just get me back to LA County." That is what we have to stop. That is what Gascon has created, that the criminals are paying attention. And they know if you go into a 7-Eleven, I had a 7-Eleven franchisee owner tell me the following. Guy came into his store. He took about $10 of merchandise. He started to walk out, and he flipped the guy a $5 bill. And the store owner said, "Well, that stuff costs $10. He says, "You should be lucky I'm giving you $5. That is now the mentality that people have, that they can basically come in, steal stuff, and there's no punishment for it. The DA's office will not prosecute.
You've gotten your family involved somewhat in the campaign, don't you?
Yeah, I know my sisters and my brother have been enormously helpful. My brother's almost my de facto campaign manager. My wife is sort of my secret weapon, but my secret weapon is my daughter.
I think we got a photo of your wife, and there's you with your dogs.
And my dogs obviously are my triple secret weapon. There's my wife, Vivian. We have been married now over 31 years. She's a native Californian from Camarillo originally, a lawyer. She was a lawyer in one of the big firms as a civil litigator, and then she actually was in charge of reality TV for one of the big TV studios. She had a pretty cool job. There's my daughter. I've done discussions with my daughter. She's up north in college. And those things started when she sort of asked me some basic questions about my campaign, and I gave her the answer, and she said, "You know what, why don't we actually record that and put that on social media? Because people my age, those are their questions." And I said, "You know what, pretty great idea." And so we've done a whole bunch of discussions with my daughter. And, and then I've been fortunate enough to be endorsed by a whole lot of different people.
I was going to say, you have one of the most impressive endorsement lists for legal-related things that I've seen in quite a while. You're basically endorsed by almost all of the former U.S. attorneys here in Los Angeles.
Yep.
I recognize a number of them. There's Robert Bonner and Deborah Yang, and who. So, how did you pull this off?
These are the advantage of being, I'm 60, and the advantage of being 60 and running for office at this point in my life is that I've spent the last 35 years working in the community, the legal community, the charitable community, the civic community, building those relationships. If you put the work in and people see what type of work you do, the results that you can generate, when it comes time to run for something, they're willing to support you. And I've been fortunate enough to get support from some incredible people.
And you have the support of a couple of my former bosses.
Yes.
Steve Cooley, who I worked for a number of years.
Steve has been on board since the beginning. 3-term LA DA. Things were really running well when he was the DA. In fact, a lot of the problems we're having today are because of policies that have basically contradicted what Steve was doing for those 12 years. They tried this again, this Gascon social experiment, and it's failed.
And then after Steve left, he was replaced by Jackie, who was the one who promoted me to my position. Amazing lady. She was in the office for a long, long time, worked her way up from a trial deputy just like me. I was actually on the same grade 4 list as she was when she got her grade 4. Way back when we were just youngins, I guess. And so she also endorsed you.
Jackie's an amazing story. She grew up in Crenshaw. Her father actually was shot in his front yard by gang members. She went to law school. She went right to the DA's office, was there over 30 years, held most positions in that DA's office until she finally became the first African-American woman to hold the position. Interestingly, on the Jackie is a Democrat. Steve Cooley's a Republican. Those U.S. attorneys are Democrats and Republicans. And a point that Jackie made, what I thought was a very important point for this election, she says it's not about politics. It's not about Democrats versus Republicans, because I know we got a very polarized society. We got a presidential election coming up. But she says the DA's election is unique. It's a nonpartisan race, so you're not going to see even party affiliation next to our names on the ballots. And it really is about who has the experience, who has the blueprint, who can keep you and your family safe for the next 4 years.
And that's why I thought it was so surprising to have Gascon run against Jackie 4 years ago, because she was an African-American woman who was progressive, and she was making changes. Apparently, it just wasn't fast enough for him. And so they brought in Gascon from San Francisco to, I guess, accelerate those changes, but they were being done already. And so when you say it's not politics, it's like there were two Democrats running against each other in that election, and it made, to me personally, no sense. Jackie was, I believe, this close to actually winning it in the primary when the Black Lives Matter showed up at her house at 4:30 in the morning, and her husband, who was the nicest man ever. I worked with him on a number of cases. He was a forensic auditor for the DA's office, and when I was in consumer protection, doing cases with hundreds of thousands of victims, and he helped analyze the evidence for me. So, and he, David, went down and answered the door with a gun, and ultimately was charged. And that's what I think ultimately kept her from being able to be reelected. And so now we've had this 4 years of this experiment, which has failed horribly. It's frustrating to see what has happened, but you give us hope that there is going to be a change.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Again, Jackie ran in a very unusual situation that summer, the summer of 2020. That was the George Floyd summer, the defund the police, the riots and protests in the streets. And George Gascon comes in with promises, a lot of promises. I can fix all the problems in the LA criminal justice system, and I guarantee you that I can bring more safety to the streets rather than less. Well, he hasn't fixed the problems in the system, and he's basically taken our safety into the abyss. The California Department of Justice just came out recently with the statistics of the violent crimes and property crimes and hate crimes over the last 4 years. They're all double digits with George Gascon. In fact, shoplifting was up 133%.
And yet he says that his policies are working to reduce it because crime is down. Yeah.
Well, they are working for criminals. If you're a criminal right now, if you don't vote for George Gascon, wow, you are voting against your interest. Because he is, if anything, he's brought in the dawn of the golden age of criminals, which I hope to bring its sunset come November 5th.
It's going to be a process because it's going to take a while for the mindset of the criminals, I think, to get back to, hey, we can't do this, because I think they're thinking they can get away with it. And in fact, they brag about it.
100%. We don't need to shoot for the 1960s or the 1970s for the target of safety that we're looking for. We only have to go back 10 years to 2014. 2014 was considered our safest year in the last 50 years. And what was going right? Well, you had a DA doing her job. That was Jackie Lacey. You had the police understand the DA's office was now their partner, so they were doing their job. You had victims know that if you dialed 911, someone would not only pick up the phone, but the DA's office and law enforcement would help bring justice to the harm you suffered. And as importantly, to your point, criminals understood that there were lines in the sand. Those lines were our laws. They were being consistently, fairly, and impartially enforced, but there were real consequences on the other side of the line. So in that year, a historic number for the last 50 years of criminals weren't committing crimes. Deterrence was working. And that is the true goal. That is the true test of an effective criminal justice system. Not how many people you can put in jail. It's how many people you can deter from committing the crimes in the first place, because that means there's a whole lot less victims in the system.
Yeah, it certainly is a different feeling on the streets now than there was in 2014. I still remember that time because I was, working downtown, and things were not near as bad as they are now, as far as even feeling safe walking to your car in a parking lot.
I was at an event about 2 weeks ago, and a woman comes up to me and she says, "Look, I'm 82. I used to walk around my neighborhood. I'm afraid. I don't walk around my neighborhood anymore." And she says, "I don't know how many more years I have, but you got to fix this. This is unacceptable." She can't leave. She's got everything invested in that house and all her friends. So she's not going anywhere. So she said, "You got to fix this. You got to win. You got to get rid of Gascon. You got to get LA County back on track." I said, "Ma'am, I will do everything in my power to make that happen." And so I'm literally running around this county getting the message out. November 5th is an incredibly important election. People, the recall didn't work against Gascon, but he's on the ballot now. If you want to make your voice heard, you need to vote, and vote for the DA's office. Hopefully when people hear about myself, they'll say, okay, that candidate makes sense. Nathan Hochman, I can vote for him and send the strong message to Gascon that now it's time to be gone.
One of the concerns I think that some people have is one of the reasons Gascon was elected is because there was a perception that the DA's office was covering up for cops, that we weren't going after bad cops, that we weren't going after shootings that were unjustified. I have something in common with you in that I also have prosecuted cops during the course of my career. I actually prosecuted cops that people in the division that prosecutes cops said there was no crime. I was like, no, there is a crime. I prosecuted it, got the conviction on a couple of different officers. And I know you've done the same thing in your job within the Department of Justice.
If I become DA, I'll be the only DA that not only has set up a foundation to get resources to the sheriff's department and partner with law enforcement, but as you said, the only DA in history that has personally prosecuted a deputy sheriff. I did it back in the 1990s. I was part of a team that went after 16 deputy sheriffs who were stealing drugs, guns, and money from drug dealers.
Was that the Majors crew from that?
Majors.
I was in Major Narcotics at the time that was going on. And believe me, I saw the effect that had. And it was something that we do need to do as prosecutors. We need to make sure that those who are enforcing our laws are following those laws. And if they don't, we need to use the full force of our offices to go after them. And so
100%.
You are not going to, they're not going to be able to paint you into a corner that you're going to cover up for cops, that you're going to allow bad shootings to go unpunished.
Not at all. I mean, I've made it crystal clear to every law enforcement person I've met with, up to the sheriff of LA County or the police chief of the LAPD, that if a police officer crosses the line, engages in criminal conduct, they will be treated like any other criminal and prosecuted for their actions. You know what they tell me, which is interesting? They said no one hates a bad cop more than a good cop, because they understand that bad cops ruin the reputation in the public's eyes for the entire department. And if they're not dealt with very swiftly, giving them full due process rights, full trials, whatever they want. But if they're not prosecuted, it sends a message that the people in charge of your safety now are allowed to run crazy and run amok. That can't happen. And so we will take a very firm stance against any law enforcement officer who crosses the line. But the overwhelming number of law enforcement officers, when those bullets are flying in the building, they're running into the building to keep us safe. Those officers deserve our respect, our admiration, and if I'm the DA, our partnership.
Yeah, it's something that as a prosecutor, I have to rely on my law enforcement partners to gather the evidence that I need to be able to to present. So it really is somewhat of a partnership, but it's not a partnership that's a cover-up. And
Absolutely.
And that is one of the things that I've seen, at least in my career, and I've tried to emulate, is that I don't let bad behavior go unpunished or unrewarded. So if there is that something crops up, it's incumbent upon all of us within the system to do what we can to rectify that.
100%. And swiftly. It can't be allowed. One of the problems with Gascon, interestingly, is he came into office saying that all those cases that supposedly Jackie Lacey, his predecessor, didn't prosecute against police officers, he was going to prosecute. Well, lo and behold, after 3.5 years, he's only prosecuted two people out of the dozens of people he said he was going to prosecute, because it turns out when he actually looked at the case and looked at the evidence wasn't there to establish the criminal violations that he assured everyone actually occurred.
And I think on one of the cases, wasn't it, it was dismissed because the prosecutor made some blunder or something?
Oh yeah, no, his implementation of his own agenda has been catastrophically incompetent. Literally, catastrophically incompetent. If I'm in charge, I will make sure that the prosecutors who are in charge of looking at police officer misconduct are the best that we can possibly put out there. They work swiftly, they work efficiently, they come up with results because victims are counting on them coming up with those results. The law enforcement officers themselves are in a limbo state. They don't know if they're going to be prosecuted or not prosecuted. We owe it to them as well to give them a decision in real time. Gascon has absolutely failed in that regard.
And one of the things you were talking about previously is his bringing public defenders over to the office and putting them in positions of power, and basically forcing out some really good people. It was interestingly, the office created a position of chief of staff where one did not exist previously. And he appointed an assistant district attorney, Vicki Adams, into that position. I think he used her as the bait to get that position, and shortly thereafter diminished all of her responsibilities and basically gave her nothing to do. She is one of the, I believe, 24 deputy DAs who have filed lawsuits for retaliation against my boss, an unheard of number. We occasionally do get lawsuits against people in the DA's office, generally not the DA himself. It's usually a manager for some type of harassment or something that wasn't caught. But we have cases against the DA directly, many of them, and some of them have resulted in $1 million verdicts against our office. That just goes to show you his lack of judgment, his lack of ability to put suitable people into suitable positions, and taking suitable people who are in suitable positions and putting them in unsuitable positions in order to punish them. One of those public defenders that he put in charge of a large section of our office has now been indicted by the Attorney General. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, again, you almost can't make this stuff up. In January of 2024, so that's almost 3.5 years after he came into office, he goes ahead and has the chance to elevate the number 3 person of the DA's office, the assistant DA, who will be in charge of ethics and integrity. He elevates a woman named Diana Turan, who had just recently come from the public defender's office. And what he knew at the time is that Diana Turan was herself the target of a criminal investigation being conducted by the California Attorney General against her for illegally basically stealing confidential police information from the sheriff's department and bringing it over to the DA's office.
And those were officers' confidential personnel files, which are protected by law.
Correct.
And she took those in her capacity as someone who was investigating the sheriff's department, apparently.
Right.
She took and copied that protected data and then brought it to the DA's office and used it?
That's the allegation. And it's not just an allegation, it's 11 felony counts. that the Attorney General himself brought against Diana Taran. It's never been done before. A senior member of the LA DA's office has never been charged with felony charges in the history of the DA's office. And it shows you, again, Gascon's catastrophic incompetence when it comes to running the office. So his chief of staff, as we discussed before, is Tiffany Blacknell. She's the deputy public defender. She wears the shirt that says the police are trained to kill us, calling them barbarians in an occupying army. His number 2 guy is a guy named Joseph Iniguez. Joseph Iniguez has only done 4 trials in his entire life, yet he was elevated to supervise people doing hundreds of trials. And he recently, or relatively recently, when he was on the eve of being arrested by the police, when his car that he was a passenger in got pulled over, tried to pull rank on the police officers and said, "Do you know who I am?"
He did the "Do you know who I am" line, and basically threatened the officer with potentially putting his name into the bad officers list.
Yeah, he absolutely did that. And, that's Gascon's number 2. And again, Gascon's number 3 person is this woman named Diana Taran, who's now looking at defending herself against 11 felony charges.
When I did my endorsement for you, one of the things that I said, I had never seen the level of incompetence that I have seen in this office, the level of mismanagement. Why we haven't replaced prosecutors who have left. Why we haven't been able to get back up to staffing levels that we've been at before. That is just another sign of his mismanagement of an office. You having run an office before and know how that works, what do you think would be like one of the first things that you would do to try to get the ship turned around as far as recruiting is concerned?
So I think once you got to start internally. You got to reestablish the esprit de corps. Again, what gives me enormous hope is that 98% of the 750 deputy district attorneys voted to support Gascon's recall. These are people who look at, who came into the office because they believe in the mission. The mission being that, look, we're going to bring justice to the people of LA County. So I will harness that basically untapped energy for the last 3.5 years, rebuild the esprit de corps, and then take that to the outside world and say, look, LA County DA's office is back in business. So please join us. And my biggest, evidence and supporters of that will be the troops themselves, sending that message out there saying we are back in business.
Yeah, I believe that we had done plebiscites and other things previously during the course of my career, but I've never seen such a disdain for whoever was the current DA.
I mean, at literally a record level. In fact, I tell people that if a business owner ever found out that 98% of their employees think they're doing such a bad job that the business owner should be fired or resigned, most business owners would hold their head in shame and walk out the back door. George Gascon is so arrogant, he almost looks at that as a badge of honor, that he with 0 years experience knows more than 750 people with thousands of years of experience.
Well, we're getting close to time on this, and I just want to say thank you so much for coming and being my very first guest. I hope it's been informative for folks. I hope you've potentially learned something. Nathan Hochman is an amazing lawyer, an amazing leader, somebody whose vision will be able to change Los Angeles, and it's a vision that is sorely needed at this time. And it's not a Republican issue. It's not a Democrat issue. Like you, I have been both a registered Republican and a registered Democrat. Now, I was a Republican for a lot longer than I was a Democrat. Actually, today is the 1-year anniversary of my registering as a Democrat. But this is not a Republican or a Democratic issue. This is a quality of life issue. And I can't think of anybody better to lead us into the future than you are, Nathan. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for this opportunity to really speak to people and get the word out. Because the only voter I am afraid of is the voter who basically is uninformed. because then they go to the ballot and it's almost a coin flip, DA Gascon versus Challenger Hochman. But if they learn anything about this race, if they learn about the total failure that Gascon has been, they learn about my experience and what I will do to restore safety, I'll win that coin flip 10 out of 10 times.
You liked what you've heard and you want to see more, click the like button and follow us, and you'll get notified when we have more shows coming up. So thank you very much.